The wind cut through the empty Philadelphia streets, and the faint sound of footsteps echoed in the cold morning air. The camera was already rolling, not because it had to, but because something unexpected was about to happen. Sylvester Stallone wasn't supposed to be here, not like this, not running. The crew didn't have a setup, no steady cam, no markers on the ground. It was chaos wrapped in instinct. The sun was slipping behind the skyline, light fading fast. Stallone looked at the stone steps in front of him, long, steep, and endless. For a moment he just stared, breathing heavy, caught between exhaustion and inspiration. Then without warning he started to run. The director shouted, "Keep filming!" And the cameraman, confused but determined, followed. Each footstep hit the ground like a drumbeat, echoing through the empty square. The rhythm grew faster, louder, as the world seemed to move in slow motion. His breath turned to fog, his legs burned, but his eyes stayed locked forward. The people nearby stopped, watching this stranger race toward the top of the world. The sound of his heartbeat blended with the city noise, and for those few seconds, nothing else existed. No crew, no movie, no audience, just a man fighting his limits. When he reached the top, he didn't celebrate. He just lifted his arms as if claiming victory over something unseen. The camera caught it all, shaky but alive. No one spoke. The silence was electric. They all knew they had witnessed something real. What began as a random decision would soon become one of the most unforgettable scenes in film history. The camera kept rolling as Stallone stood there breathing hard, unaware that this single run would define him forever. It was 1975, and Hollywood wasn't waiting for Sylvester Stallone. He was just another struggling actor with a drawer full of rejection letters and a dream that felt too big for his pocket. His apartment was small, the kind where the walls seemed to listen to your hopes and echo them back as doubts. Every night, under the dim glow of a single bulb, he typed, not a studio scriptwriter, not a star, just a man trying to turn hunger into words. The story he wrote wasn't about superheroes or riches. It was about a fighter who had nothing but heart, a man named Rocky. Stallone poured himself into that script, each page a reflection of his own battles. When he finished it, he carried it from studio to studio, waiting for someone to believe. They liked the story, but not him. "Sell us the script," they said, "and we'll find a real actor for the role." He refused every time. Because to Stallone, Rocky wasn't a character. He was a mirror. Days turned into weeks, money ran thin, and faith flickered like a dying candle. But somehow that same stubbornness that made him broke kept him going. Eventually, a small studio took a gamble. A low-budget film, short schedule, and barely enough crew to make it work. It wasn't the dream, but it was a start. The city of Philadelphia would become his stage. Its cracked streets and cold mornings the perfect backdrop for a story about endurance. No one knew it yet, but something extraordinary was about to happen. In the calm before the storm, while the world saw a struggling actor trying to make a movie, Stallone was quietly rewriting his destiny. One line, one dream, and soon, one unforgettable run at a time. The morning of the shoot was colder than expected, and time was slipping away faster than anyone realized. The schedule was falling apart. Too many retakes, too little light, and too many things that could go wrong. The crew was tired, hands stiff from the cold, cameras running low on film. Stallone stood near the van, watching the sky darken, the clock ticking louder in his head. They needed something. One final shot, one moment that captured everything Rocky stood for. But no one knew what that was. The director looked around, searching for a spark, something they could shoot before the day ended. Then Stallone's eyes caught the massive stone steps of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. They rose into the air like a challenge, quiet and waiting. For a moment he said nothing. Then he turned, jogged a few steps toward them, and said softly, "Let's shoot this." No one planned it. No one rehearsed it. The cameraman barely had time to adjust focus before Stallone started running. It wasn't about the perfect angle or lighting anymore. It was about instinct. Each step he climbed felt like rebellion against everything that tried to stop him. The rejections, the poverty, the doubt. The crew didn't shout directions. They just watched, almost frozen as something raw unfolded before them. The sound of his breathing filled the air, heavy and determined. Every frame was imperfect, shaky, grainy, real. But that was the magic of it. At the top, Stallone turned, looking down at the city as if he'd conquered the world, though the world didn't know it yet. The light faded completely, but the energy stayed. What started as desperation became destiny. The spark had ignited, and it would soon set the screen and history on fire. There was no plan, no polished setup, just pure instinct guiding every move. The camera jolted as the operator tried to keep pace, tripping over his own steps while Stallone surged forward, running harder, faster, like a man being chased by time itself. The city blurred around him. Gray skies, silent buildings, a handful of strangers stopping to stare. His breath came out in heavy bursts, visible in the cold, each exhale a mix of pain and purpose. The sound of his shoes striking the pavement echoed like a drumline to destiny. Every muscle screamed, but he didn't stop. With every stride, he was no longer just Sylvester Stallone, an unknown actor. He was Rocky, the fighter who refused to fall. The camera shook, sweat froze, and the director whispered under his breath, "Keep rolling." The rhythm of the scene wasn't cinematic perfection. It was life, raw, unfiltered, human. As Stallone neared the final stretch, the crew could feel the electricity in the air, that invisible moment when reality and fiction melt into one. He took the last steps 2 at a time, arms pumping, lungs burning. Then suddenly silence. He reached the top. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. No sound, no movement, just Stallone standing against the wide-open sky. Then he lifted his arms, not as an actor hitting his mark, but as a man realizing what he'd just done. Below him, the city stretched endlessly, a symbol of everything he'd fought for. The cameraman's hands trembled, not from the cold, but from awe. The shot wasn't perfect, and it was alive. And in that moment, everyone on set knew this wasn't just a movie scene anymore. This was a heartbeat immortalized on film, a climb that turned struggle into triumph, forever. When the camera finally stopped rolling, no one spoke. The city noises returned slowly, cars in the distance, a faint breeze rustling through the trees. But on those steps, there was only silence. Stallone stood at the top, catching his breath, his hands still raised. The crew looked at each other, unsure of what they had just witnessed. There were no cheers, no claps, just a strange stillness that hung in the air like reverence. The director lowered his camera, shaking his head in disbelief. "We got it," he whispered, though no one had truly planned what it even was. The moment had happened by accident, a burst of raw emotion that couldn't be written, rehearsed, or recreated. Stallone walked back down slowly, each step echoing with something bigger than exhaustion, something closer to destiny. The cameraman replayed the footage, the shaky frame showing Stallone's silhouette against the skyline. The imperfections made it perfect. Every bounce, every blur, every breath told a story no script ever could. The crew gathered around, eyes fixed on the tiny screen, watching magic unfold right in front of them. Some smiled, some just stared. It was as if they all knew, deep down, that this scene would outlive them all. Back at the van, the producer said little. They didn't know it yet, but history had just been captured in a single take. That night, Stallone barely slept. He couldn't explain why that run felt different, only that it had come from a place too real to ignore. What was meant to be a filler shot had become the heart of the entire film. The next morning, the world still didn't know. But those who were there, they understood that something timeless had been born on those cold stone steps. Time has a way of turning moments into legends. For Stallone, the Rocky steps were no longer just part of a film. They were a reminder of everything that can happen when instinct meets faith. Decades later, he still speaks of that day with quiet awe, as if even he can't fully explain it. He often says that nothing about it was rehearsed, and maybe that's why it worked. The scene wasn't about a man reaching the top. It was about every person who ever dared to try. In every rewatch, audiences don't just see Stallone. They see themselves running toward something that once felt impossible. The energy, the music, the raised arms, it all became a universal language of resilience. On The Tonight Show, the audience listened closely as Stallone described that moment. The studio lights reflected in his eyes, and for a second, you could almost see the young dreamer he once was. The same man who refused to sell his story, who believed in something no one else did. "Sometimes," he said softly, "you don't plan greatness. It just finds you." The crowd went silent, not out of politeness, but because they felt it. That's what made the Rocky Steps scene more than cinema. It was truth captured in motion. When the applause finally came, Stallone smiled humbly, almost shyly, as though he didn't own the legend that grew around him. The truth is he didn't, the world did, because the run up those steps wasn't just his victory. It was everyone's. And as the camera faded to black, his voice lingered in the air, a whisper echoing through time. The steps weren't part of the plan, but maybe destiny was. The silence that followed spoke louder than words ever could. In a world obsessed with perfection, that moment on the Philadelphia steps reminds us that greatness is rarely planned. Stallone didn't chase glory that day, he chased a feeling. And in doing so, he created something no script or budget could ever buy: authenticity. The kind that moves people decades later, long after the credits fade. The Rocky steps became more than a scene. They became a symbol of what happens when you trust your instinct and keep moving, even when no one's watching. Every time someone climbs those stairs, they aren't just honoring a movie. They're proving that spirit still matters. Because sometimes the most unforgettable victories are born in silence, from impulse, from heart. Stallone once said, "It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that's why it lasted forever." Soft piano fades in. The screen dims to black. On-screen text. In a world built on applause, silence can still speak louder. Then one final line fades in, inviting reflection. What would you have done?